Hey guys, we're back talking about playing bebop guitar, and I've had a couple requests for some more lesson videos, so I was thinking about doing a series of videos about bebop, the language of bebop, and how to adapt it to the guitar. It doesn't really lay naturally. It's not sort of native to the fretboard the way we think, and so there's some considerations we have in dealing with it. As we know it, bebop, and that name has stuck later on to the music, but it developed in the early 40s when the big bands sort of went out of fashion a little bit. Maybe a lot of the big bands that were very successful were over in Europe during the war or elsewhere. And back home, especially in New York, there were certain taxes that were changed that made it not worth for club owners to have a big band or a singer or a dance floor. Actually, they had a tax if you had a singer or a dance floor in some of the clubs in New York on the food and drinks. So what they ended up doing is getting a small stage for a combo and fill it up with tables, and people would sit and listen to the music. And this was sort of a new thing for the jazz people, as opposed to the musicians supporting a singer or being part of a big band where people are dancing, where they're supporting a primary activity. Now the primary activity was listening to the musicians play. It did a couple of things for them. It allowed them to not be limited by dance tempos, not be limited by the range or the keys that the singer needs to sing in. They could play as slow as they want, as fast as they want, as long as they want, take as many solos as they want. And so it created a little bit of a laboratory for musicians to take all that they learned from years of playing on the road in big bands and extend their art into another level. And that's kind of how we got the music that we now call bebop. Some guys, if you want to listen to, you want to check out definitely the Dizzy Gillespie Charlie Parker recordings, all of them, as many as you can lay your hands on. There's also early recordings of Charlie Christian actually being part of the scene at a nightclub uptown called Mittens in Harlem. And it was sort of a late night hang where musicians would show up after the gig, and a couple of guys showed up and recorded some of the stuff that they were doing. And it was interesting to hear the guitar playing a very early role in the creation of the music, and somehow the classic bebop sort of quintet does not include guitar. I don't know why, it just doesn't, although we know that we can play anything that the piano players play. We'll just keep that our secret. So anyway, I want to talk about it, and there's some scales to look at first. One of the things that we figured out over the years is that we want to land chord tones on the downbeat. In order to do that, we have to modify some of the scales that we know very well. For example, the major scale is a 7-note scale. And if you play 2 octaves down, 2 octaves up, you don't land on the downbeat, you land somewhere else in the measure. What we need is to land on the downbeat every time we hit the end of the figure that we're playing. So in the case of the major scale, a new note was added to the scale, which was the raised fifth. In between the 5th and the 6th, it put a chromatic flow into the scale. Also, it gave it 8 notes, so it filled up the whole measure. And now you're on the downbeat, and whatever you did, you can keep doing, and you don't have to stop. The same thing for the Mixolydian mode. The natural 7th was added to the Mixolydian mode. And in that case, when you're ascending, it's often more effective to redirect around the root and then hit it, rather than play the flat 7, then the natural 7, then the root, because that tends to dilute the dominant sound of what you're playing. And of course I threw in a sharp 11, which is a common thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So that was the bebop dominant scale. Bebop minor scale is essentially the same thing, just transposed to fit the 2 chord. So if I play that scale starting on a G with the same group of notes, that's what that would be. And that's reflecting our concept of the 2 chord and the 5 chord essentially being the same thing. And that's how I approach it. Whenever I see a minor 7, And you know, if I see a 2/5, I just start and play the whole thing as a unit, and then maybe resolve it when I get to a 1 chord. I mean, most of the time you don't even get to a 1 chord in a lot of tunes that we play. So those are the 3 scales to think about. And really the most important one is the bebop dominant, because everything comes from that. And it actually lays pretty well on the guitar. We always start at the top. I tend to start at the top. I don't know why, but you have 4 chromatic notes. And that's all right in the position there, so it's really easy. The next octave is a little tricky because it takes you out of position. I have to do that, and I've got to try to make it sound fluid. But one thing to try to do would be able to play it up and down in that same format. Now that scale that I played works over the G minor, the C7, and you know, we play that as a C9 chord, but that's also an E minor 7 flat 5 chord, right? Especially if we're going to follow it up with an A7 or in a D minor. That scale works great. So these things lead to more things that if your ear starts getting used to hearing it, you can branch out and cover a lot more territory, deal with a lot more situations. Here's some small snippets of some examples that you can use to start putting the scale to work. Now the first thing you can do is just play the scale up and down. It sounds really good, it makes a really good intelligent line. But here's a couple of things we can do. We can do the first 3 notes of the scale and then drop down to a D and play a D minor triad, DFA, and then land on G. What the line is really doing is it's working its way from C down to G, but as we are going down, we drop and then redirect back up and hit to the line. And that's a lot of what bebop is about. It's about redirecting the line. The shape of the line even changes if I were to take, for example, these first 3 notes and drop them down an octave. The whole line sounds different. I keep playing it different every time. And so, as long as I'm landing downbeats, there's some chromatic notes that you can forgive. As long as your chord tones are on the downbeats. So, I'm going to have links to these 3 scale shapes and a couple of these licks that I just did at the bottom of the channel. And I will see you next time, and we'll look at some more examples over real tunes, specific tunes, and some drills to practice. So I'll see you guys next time.